there, it's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with another, I guess we can call this one a rant video, but I used to do this video series of top 10s when rotation was about to occur, and we have rotation coming up, so I thought I'd revive this series, which is the top 10 cards I won't miss that are rotating out of Standard 2021. So with Innistrad coming in, we get to say goodbye to these trash cards that have ruined the format for so long. So I'm so happy to say sayonara to these cards, and without further ado, let's get right into the list. These might not be the most impressive cards, the most powerful cards. These are just particularly the cards that I hated the most. And for this year, we actually probably could do almost a top 10 list of cards that end up getting banned. So I'm not including banned cards. These are still cards that are legal that I think are obnoxious and should not have existed, or I'm just glad that they are gone. So here we go. On to our number 10. Our number 10 is Ugin the Spirit Dragon. I know, it's not that oppressive. There aren't a lot of decks that have used it recently, but when the format was young, when the last rotation occurred, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, right when it came out with M21, was pretty dominant in many different decks. It just was one of those cards that all roads lead to Ugin. So if you were in like a control-based shell, all you had to do is get to 8 mana, and you had a silver bullet against a vast amount of decks. Now, Ugin has fallen off out of favor because it can't be tutored up with Emergence Ultimatum, and it also is a bit slow for the really aggressive strategies like Mono Red and Winota. However, I do think that cards like Ugin are bad for formats because they inevitably do prey on mid-range decks that could deal with either the wombo combos or the hyper-aggressive decks. So if just by having Ugin in the format, it is going to guarantee that aggro and combo stays prevalent because Ugin is going to prey on any synergy or mid-range base strategy. So I do not like these cards. I don't like, of course, a colorless Silver Bullet Planeswalker is just bad for a standard format, and I was very disappointed they reprinted this into standard. I think it would have been better if they wanted to reprint for the cost of it, to throw it in a commander product or throw it somewhere else other than in standard. So I will not be sad to see Ugin the Spirit Dragon going. It'd be probably way higher up on this list if the dominant aggro strategies weren't a thing, but it did have its time where it was very, very oppressive for deck building. If you couldn't beat Ugin, your deck just didn't work. Alrighty, so that leads us to our number 9, and this is a very similar card as Ugin that hasn't seen a lot of play late, but at the start of when this card was printed, as well as when the rotation occurred, this is a very dominant card because this is a card that makes all bad cards good, and it is something that it can snowball out of control, and this is the Great Hinge. So the Great Hinge, I had a couple of problems with this card, in particular because Throne of Eldraine was just the laziest set ever. They just printed a bunch of cards that immediately synergized with their cards in the set. So instead of finding like a card that worked with it from previous sets, they went ahead and printed Lovestruck Beast, which was just on curve with the Great Hinge. And then when we had Zendikar come out, you could still get the Great Hinge out incredibly quick with a Fabled Passage and a landfall creature that you could get up to a 7/7, and the Great Hinge just cost 2. And then once this card got out, it really started to take over the format. At the very first of when this was printed, there wasn't a lot of answers to artifacts or ones you wanted to put in your deck. Now it seems to be a little bit better. There are some value stuff that you can destroy an artifact or actually interact with this. Even things like Elite Spellbinder is a good versus at least delaying the Great Hinge. However, the Great Hinge, like I said before, is a card that just makes all bad cards good, and it is one of those strategies, too, that all roads, for a bit, led to running the Great Hinge. We had Adventures that were running the Great Hinge, we had Mono Greens, we had the Gruul decks, we had some Simic decks, we had a lot of decks, or Green-Black Adventures, that all were just packing in the Great Hinge, and it became these big Great Hinge wars because the value was just absurd with this card. So this is another card that has fallen out of favor because it doesn't do anything in its combo and hyper-aggressive strategies, which unfortunately is what we're plagued with in Standard right now. But if we were to go to a mid-range or into a control-based format, then this would be a card that would just overwhelm and dominate, and you'd have to play it. And those are the particular cards I don't like. I don't like when a format is so dominated by a strategy or a card that you feel complied to put it in the deck. So the Great Hinge, not sad that it's gone. It was probably printed for Commander to begin with. Let it stay in Commander. I do not want it in a standard environment. Alrighty, so we're get kind of the ones that have fallen out of favor that were dominant at one point in time. I think now the next 8 cards are very obnoxious or either bad design. The next one is Into the Story. So I could pick a lot of things for this slot for rogues, but I think this is the card that was just it really was the paste, the glue of the rogues deck to have that insane card advantage. So there are a lot of ways to combat rogues with like just one for wanting them. They mill you, cool, whatnot. But Into the Story, this is my problem with design lately, is they need to slow down on the card draw. I guess you could put Great Hinge in that category as well, but they've made card draw too easy. And now I'm pretty disappointed too with treasures. So two things with Magic. Magic has a pace. It's a pacing game where each turn it slowly builds up into the climax to where now you have your turn 5, your turn 6, where you're really starting to interact with your opponent. So the great are Into the Story or treasures, they kind of circumvent that with card draw or fast mana. So Into the Story, you can be a lot more willy-nilly with your removal. Just remove whatever your opponents, whatever you want to remove from your opponents. And then who cares? You're just going to outdraw your opponents through things with like for a 5 mana spell that draws 4 cards. So it's just, or 4 mana actually, when you have the cards in your opponent's graveyard. So it's just backbreaking for Into the Story. The reduction is too easy to, I think when they looked at this, they're like, okay, maybe this late game, then you'll have enough cards in your opponent's graveyard that you'll be able to cast it Into the Story, refill back up your hand, and all is good at that point. All's fair in love and war at that point when the game's gone on long enough where you can then cast this for cheap and then, draw some cards and get some tempo. But with the ability with rogues to mill and with the Hedron Crab and many other ways to get cards into your opponent's graveyard, this works perfectly in those type of decks. And it was just backbreaking. 4 cards for 1 card. Let's take the mana aside. 4 cards for 1 card with reasonable mana is just it just breaks kind of the whole tempo of the game and that whole climax what I speaking of. So I'm not sad to see Into the Story go. I think this actually was the problem with rogues. And then take this card away, they'd have to use a lot of 2-for-1s or whatnot, which I think is much, much more fair. All right, on to the next one, which is a card that I am absolutely cannot stand this card. This is Zenith Flare. Zenith Flare is just the laziest of the laziest designs, so it's not really Zenith Flare that I'm the most kind of teed with. It's just that they printed an entire cycling deck. Yes, it's changed a little bit now that they've gone back to using some of the newer cards or the drawing. Cycling turned into more of drawing 2 cards per turn just because the meta shifted where taking care of aggro is more important than just going wombo combo with it. But there was a point where it was Ikoria draft deck was good enough for standard because they printed just enough to make exactly a 60 card deck with enough 1 mana cyclers and Zenith Flare. So you had your creature, your little kitty cat that could get out of control that was a threat, and then you had your 1 damage per cycling guy that could wheedle down your opponent, and then you just had to draw until you have a Zenith Flare. 2 Zenith Flares get this job done. Boom, game is, it was like 60 cards, didn't need to add any from any of their sets, throw it together with draft trash, all in commons, and put the card together. I can't stand when Wizards of the Coast is so lazy with their set design that they build the decks for you. Actually, well, I guess it's not laziness. They just think you're too stupid. They think the player's too stupid to figure out their own decks. So we're just gonna make you the deck for you. And unfortunately, that's what I've been seeing a lot of these. There have been some innovations even recently with the way the decks have been built, but by and large, many sets that have come out that since we've gone to these 1 block standard sets, they've put exactly enough, not any more, not any less, to build whatever deck that they want you to build, and you end up playing these kind of cookie cutter shells that they've included in that 1 block set. When we used to have 3 blocks, that was less pronounced because you'd have to like wait for the cards that tied it all together. So there's all that anticipation, or what I was talking before, the climax of building up to, oh, maybe now enchantments will work when we get the 3rd Theros set. Unfortunately, with these 1 block sets, they try to just jam pack everything into enough stuff into 1 shell to where then they can, have a standard playable deck. And it's just, this card just annoys me on so many different levels. So uninteractive. Do not like this card whatsoever. Yes, Graveyard did, work with it. They did print us some Graveyard cards, but still, it was very obnoxious. Alrighty, so next up on our number 6 is what could beat a Zenith Flare. So these four, you can see they're yeah, I guess we could say that Rogues was tier 1 for quite a while, so was Cycling. But now we're really getting into the problem cards in the format. And these are the next few cards are cards that were just on a higher power level than the rest of the cards. And mainly it's the cards from Throne of Eldraine were just so pushed that they wanted their mechanic to shine, that they not only did they make the mechanic incredibly strong, but they made the bodies that they were attached to very strong. And this is Bone Crusher Giant. This card I have problems with on so many different levels. It was, if you're in red, you're playing it. It made any 2 toughness creature a liability. It's just a word salad card. It had too many things on one card. You get a 4/3 for 3, which is way above curve. They then had the ability to tax your opponent if you targeted it, so it does 2 damage to the spell's controller if it's targeted. So right then and there is a pretty decently aggressive card. Without its then ability to then not have damage, or have damage not be prevented this turn and do 2 damage to any target. So it just has so much going there that this card, I know that they wanted some sort of way to push through maybe fogs, if a turbo fog strategy ever became a thing, like a take a turn turbo fog. But it was just this whole instant or adventure based stuff with even Lovestruck Beast and a few other ones that I think they made the bodies that they put them on too powerful, when it would be very, I mean, a 3/3, a 3/2 even would be much more reasonable than a 4/3 for 3 mana that had all these upsides. And that's this, we've been in a Bone Crusher Giant format since it's been printed. It's one of the few cards that is still playable outside of the, I mean, well, actually this standard's been very powerful. I don't even know why I made that comment. There have been many cards. Its cousin with the fairy, I can't think of the 3/1 flash return a card, that sees a lot of play outside of standard. But this one just seemed to be like, as far as standard level is concerned, on a power level of its own, where it just outclasses anything of this slot, where you get that 2-for-1 creature and a spell, and just insanely on curve. You stomp, then put the Bone Crusher Giant, which was just ridiculous amount of power level into one card. So I'm not going to miss having to play Bone Crusher Giant if I'm in red, and having it synergize with basically every deck out there. Spells-based decks still want it because it can cast the spell side of it. It still even sees playing like Winota because it's a giant that then can attack. So this card just did it all. And I don't like cards like that, again, where I feel like compelled to actually play this card. Alrighty, so on to my number 5. Number 5 is another card in that same kind of category here, and this is going to be the Shark Typhoon. This is another card I felt like it was just pushed too much by giving the cycling, the ability just to, what used to make these cards a liability is if you had a 6-mana enchantment payoff, then it hurt your early game. Well, the Shark Typhoon allowed you to cycle it, and cycle it actually for a big flash creature. You can actually cycle this, can't be countered, end of turn for exactly lethal if you needed to do that. But it is also a card that if you do stick this card, it gets out of control very quickly. The thing that this didn't say instant or sorcery, it was any non-creature spell. So it worked off, Planeswalkers, enchantments, worked off of the Shark Typhoon, casting another Shark Typhoon after a Shark Typhoon. Worked. Now casting off with Emergent Ultimatum with casting it, and then another card, you actually get another, you get like a 7-drop, then now you have a 7/7, and it's just overwhelming at that point that what the Shark Typhoon does. This is on a power level all of its own. It was, again, all roads led to playing Shark Typhoon. If you were in control, you didn't have like options of what am I going to run as my finisher. It's going to be Shark Typhoon. It's going to go in that deck because it just did it all. It can cantrip, it can get you a big flash creature for defense and draw you a card, and then if you can stick it as an enchantment, then it just overwhelmed very, very quickly. So I didn't like the design of this card. I think that maybe the tokens should have flying, maybe they shouldn't be XX, maybe they should be half X. I don't know. Half X rounded up. I don't know. Something they should have. The power level, again, was just too creeped high for this particular card. I felt like this is probably another commander card that just got pushed into standard, and they didn't, maybe, they upped the power because they wanted it more powerful in commander, and it just ended up warping standard, in my opinion. Yes, it hasn't seen the most play as of late, but it's still typically an Emergent Ultimatum. They are running this card, and other control-based shells still are going to this as their route to finish the game. Alrighty, so on to the next one. Now we're really getting to the juicy stuff. This is, a problem with Ikoria in general was companions. and Loris, the Dream Den. I'm mostly looking at this card because of the companion, and this card is Plague Legacy in Modern. We have to deal with this crap for the rest of eternity because they decided to print the stupid mechanic where you're allowed to have one additional card in your starting hand. That is so bonkers. Like, people have compared Loris to Black Lotus, that having that additional card, when it actually fits in that deck, they had to rat companions to then have that 3 tax to then put it into your hand. But still, this is a card that can't be like thought seized out of your hand early. So late game, you can then run Luris. I'm talking about Modern here. You can then cast Luris. You have an additional card that didn't really have many deck restrictions when you have plenty of options with converted mana cost 2 or less. And then it can get you right back into the game. So this was backbreaking as a companion in like Rogues and some of the mono white shells still even ran it until, you know, started getting a little bit better things to do with the converted mana cost. But as is, even as a card, this card was very, very pushed. See, it felt like Bone Crusher Giant. The body and ability alone was good, and then there was no drawback by having a companion. I think if they were going to evaluate a companion, that it should be strictly worse than its counterparts that couldn't be a companion. And many of the companions did fit that build. They're like, this is okay. If my deck restrictions actually work, then I'll throw it in, but it's not that, you know, decent comparatively to another thing I could put in this slot. Taking one sideboard slot was laughable. It's not a big deal whatsoever. And this one, a 3/2 lifelinker for 3 mana that immediately started to get value as a companion, was just backbreaking. So Luris was just a plague for Standard, and even though I use Luris a lot, I mean, it's one of my favorite cards because it's a synergy value card, and if you've watched my channel for a long time, you know these are catnip, pun intended, for a brewer like me to have these value engines. But Luris is just, every deck you're playing in white and black, you're going to try to find synergies with it to, you know, to really justify. All the shells just go to Luris decks at that point. A lot of mono white decks, you know, that they end up always going back to Luris. Alrighty, that leads us to our top 3, where now we're getting into the 3 cards. Here we go. Here's the holy trinity of bad design, in my opinion, for this one that is currently still plaguing Standard. So the first one being Immersion Ultimatum. I hate this card. Now, I don't like the other ultimatums either. This is the big problem one, and it really became a problem when we found enough targets, especially Wombo combos, one with the Vorinclex and the Tibalt, and then still just with the, you know, even getting like Shark Typhoon and getting Cura's Blessing of the Sea God. That is a huge value. I think it just took like that Wombo combo to really start making people play this deck, and then they found out how good, how backbreaking finding in, you know, 12 plus mana worth of cards, usually even more than that, or finding the Silver Bullet removal spell plus a threat you can put out, or what really put this one over the top was the take extra turn. Once you can then have a take extra turn, your opponents have to choose that, and you get the other 2. Usually you get the other 2 no matter what. So these type of cards I always haven't liked in first of all, they make deck building kind of dull. You just put in this very specific high mana cost. They cheat in a lot of mana for very little. When Cultivate came in the format too, this just became, even with Cultivate out of it, you still had cards from like Ikoria that searched for 2 lands. Binding worked with this. A lot of ways to actually find the mana. It wasn't hard to fix this mana. I think they evaluated this card as like maybe a 10 drop because it was 7 specific. So it was like, oh, you can't Tron into this. You have to have specific green, blue, black. But in this particular format, it is so easy to fix that casting Immersion Ultimatum on turn 6, even on turn 5, sometimes is not even that big of an issue. I mean, mana fixing's so good that Solemn Simulacrum's not even really seeing play in these type of shells. It would be, I mean, even synergized with Yorion to be able to be flickered, and people decide not to even use it in most of the decks. That's how good the mana base is at the moment. So I would put some of the other ultimatums in this one as well, but this one was definitely the one that was too efficient and too effective at just getting the job done. It was an I win card. You cast it, you most likely have won the game because the amount of value they're going to get off Immersion Ultimatum is going to be too backbreaking for other decks to come back from. So I'm glad this is gone. I don't like these type of cards that just search and explicitly put them into play. This also cast them too, which had some other unforeseen problems with then getting cast triggers and stuff. And this card, this Immersion Ultimatum, was just it just ruined once that combo was identified and once the fixing was perfect, it just ruined the format from then on out. Still number one played deck. I'm so glad it's gone. All right, so what could be an Emergent Ultimatum? What cards could Kevin hate more than this Wombo Combo I win button? Well, Ambercleave. I am actually surprised that there is a card I hate more than Ambercleave, because I hate this card so much. Lazy design. It had too much synergy with Mono Red at the time with like Annex and with Torbran that just made this card go bonkers. Then you also have the 1/1 Knight that then you could equip for free. You have some lands that were easy to animate and then put Ambercleave on it. It had so much synergy with even the guy that get equipment gains haste goblin. Then when it died, there's just too much going on with this particular card. The 4 mana is laughable. It's just like Great Hinge. You never cast this for 4 mana. This card would be playable if it was 4 red and a red that did this ability, because this was a repeatable. What's the card I'm thinking about now? The +1/+1 double strike trample out of Dragonstar here or yeah, one of those. Why can't I think of the card that was played in modern playable? But this one is going to get reduced because it's so easy with red to attack with 4 creatures, perfectly on curve. The amount of games that I've lost to Ambercleave, or basically you had to play around this stupid card. It actually wasn't bad in duplicates because you could have an Ambercleave attached to a creature and play another one and just kind of move it over at that point. But double strike, trample, and yeah, just +1/+1 double strike and trample in a format of Bone Crusher Giants and Annexes and Torbran was just, you cast Ambercleave, you typically win on that turn. Just the value of this card was just, and again, it's not backbreaking. You can run removal, Kevin. Run removal. It's just the times that Ambercleave gets you when you had a deck. There have been many decks that I have the perfect deck to answer Ambercleave, and I just didn't happen to have the answer for that particular deck, and Cleave just gets you. No time to react over that. It's one turn, you're dead. You're done with an Ambercleave, and that's it. And it's just too little to get a huge payoff to play this card. And couple in the fact that Arena loves to give you these magical Christmas land curves, that it almost feels like every game there's an Ambercleave in your opponent's hand with 4 low drops, Ambercleave, same thing, rinse repeat every game. I grew so tired of this trash design card. Again, they probably shouldn't have been able to reduce it, maybe cap the reduction of where it could be reduced from, or just done anything to this card to make it so it was a little more fair to play against. So hate this card, hate this kind of flash crap that they keep doing. The less interactive is with your opponent, the better. Well, it is interactive. You flash it in and equip it. Ugh, give me a break. This card is just a joke. Hate this card. Hate Ambercleave. Glad it's gone. Glad a few of the other mono red pieces are rotating too. Annex just seems so pushed. I don't like Torbran. I don't like a lot of the ways that they do this. Maybe I'm just a mono red hater. That's pretty. That's very very fair statement there. But glad Ambercleave especially is gone out of the format, and I won't ever have to deal with this stupid card ever again. Alrighty, so number 1. What could I hate more than all of these cards? That's very simple. Yorion. This card is so trash. This is the trashiest design card of a long time. I mean, Companion is by far the worst mechanic in Magic. It's worse than Storm. It's worse than Cascade. Companion is just a joke. I can't stand this mechanic. And then throw on a deck restriction that is just laughable, where adding 20 cards to your deck in a format that actually has mill, where it can actually be an upside to throw Yorion. People have memed this and put in mono red and just ran dual lands that had the white, and it's actually pretty good because it's just a free creature that can get you. It's just a free card with no drawback. Throwing it with Emergent Ultimatum, it really puts that deck over the top because a lot of things are blinkable. Like it's quite easy to throw a deck and throw 4 omens. I mean, you're already pretty close there with an additional 7-8 lands. Now all you have to do is basically add 12 cards. There's 4 omens that are fine. They help you scry. They help mitigate that whole 80 card thing. They allow you to have a target with Yorion, and all like mid-range or control based or value based strategies all have to run Yorion. Might as well run Yorion. Oh, I'm going to create this deck. Well, might as well add 20 cards and add Yorion. Let's add the same cards, the flicker strategy of every deck. Oh, I was going to build this. Oh, and then you start to be like, well, if I'm already in Yorion, well, forget this then. I need to find some other things. It might just be slightly better to then synergize with Yorion. It is just this effect was just too powerful to put on a free card to be able to exile any number of non-land permanents and then return them to the battlefield. The fact that even like reset planeswalkers, Just so much. If you had if you're going against like people that ran enchantments or things that shut down your stuff, you could just flicker them, they're gone. This card was absolutely bonkers in the power level and just too easy as a companion to get that value by just adding 20 cards. I hate this card. I'm so glad it's gone. I think that the ability to build decks now is wide open now because of Yorion out of the mix. So I'm excited for Standard just because this card and Ambercleave are gone. I think without these two cards particularly, we have a totally different meta. I could put a couple other cards on this list that I didn't include, like Winota. Winota's starting to get out of hand again because it finally has. Winota's one of those cards where you need all the pieces, you need the big payoffs, and we didn't have the payoffs. And now with Forgotten Realms, there is enough with like Minsk, and then you got the double striker from the set before. Cards like even Fabled Passage, I don't think were good for the format when you threw in Landfall. I still don't like some of the cards that aren't rotating. I think that we're going into a format that's going to be pretty warped by Goldspan Dragon. But hopefully with Innistrad, we get some ways to combat it, whether it be a good tempo-based strategy that can just go underneath Goldspan Dragon, or just a sacrifice effect. I think would be pretty good too to combat that. But yeah, I think that this is a pretty decent list of cards that are very obnoxious. I'm interested in hearing your cards that you are glad that are going to rotate, and be sure to be looking forward to part number 2 of cards that I'm going to miss post-rotation. So even though I am a negative Nancy, there are great design cards that, man, there are so many good cards that were fun cards in this format that were just not on this power level. And that's what's so sad about the design team, is they restricted a bunch of cards that I think could have easily been not worded a certain way or given another toughness so they could dodge, Bone Crusher Giant, for example, or just the fact that like anything with 3 or 4, like how much is Questing Beast seeing play now? It really seems that anything that's converted mana cost 3 and 4 is such a liability right now, unless it's in like a hyper aggressive strategy or like a control based strategy to get you towards Emergent Ultimatum. So there's a lot of this format, a lot of cards, a lot of beautiful cards that are printed over these last sets that are rotating that I thought were great fun cards. And unfortunately, we won't get to experience them as much as I wish we could have experienced them. People have asked me what my favorite Standard format of all time was. Definitely Innistrad Return to Ravnica, because I still believe that when Innistrad rotated, that we still hadn't scratched the surface of the things that were available from those two sets. So hopefully Design can get their act together and we can actually find some a good balance with cards that keep everyone's interest, but are not just completely format warping on power level. And think of this too. This is after banning a ton of cards. This is after getting even how many cards were banned? Probably the whole top 10 list were banned with like Okos and stuff. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Rant Builder. Thanks for watching.